Hello, everybody. Dr. Lonnie Stewart here from the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. Are you a physical therapy student about to start studying for the National Physical Therapy Examination? Or maybe you're a professor, a program director, or clinical instructor who teaches DPT students preparing for the NPTE? Either way, we would recommend checking out our sponsor, NPTE Final Frontier, and the community they've built around preparing for and succeeding on the NPTE. That exam and the preparation that goes along with it can be long, tedious, difficult, and stress-inducing, but it doesn't have to be. NPTE Final Frontier has the tactics and resources to help address all of the usual barriers. They even have scholarships to help with NPTE study courses, FSBPT registration fees, and even research opportunities. And if that's not enough, they're even donating to the very first annual HET Podcast Scholarship to be awarded at the end of every year. Go to npteff.com for all of the details and use code HET for 10% off all purchases. Links to both the NPTE Final Frontier and their scholarship options are available in the show notes. And now, let's get ready to learn.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. We are so very excited to have Dr. Julian Magee, a physical therapist and athletic trainer, who is the Assistant Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and an Assistant Professor of Physical Therapy and Orthopedic Surgery at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis. Welcome, Dr. Magee, to our podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, we are excited. Now, before we get into the
Interesting.
nitty-gritty of you sharing your insights on our topic of psychological safety, why don't you tell us a little bit about your educational journey? How'd you come to be from student to clinician to esteemed faculty member?
Oh, wow. That is an interesting journey, actually. So, I started out when I left high school. I knew I wanted to work in healthcare and I wanted to work in sports. I was not great enough to be an athlete, or I wasn't a great athlete, I should say. So I thought I liked medicine and I started out in athletic training and I stuck with it. And I thought maybe I'll be an orthopedic surgeon. I just didn't want to go to school that long, honestly. But I really gravitated to athletic training. And so I'm thinking like most athletic trainers, I'll go work in pro sports. But the thing that I loved about athletic training the most was the rehab process.
Mhm.
So I found myself, and I loved being on the athletic field, the athletic court, but I really loved the athletic training room. I hated when my athletes got hurt, but I just loved, it was something about getting them back. I looked at it as kind of like being a mechanic for the most exotic cars in the world. The body was like that to me. It's like this exotic machine that I had some level of responsibility to take care of and to get back to its full function. And that's what led me to go to PT school. So as an athletic training student about to graduate, I applied to two graduate assistant positions in athletic training. And then I applied to two PT schools, one at home, which was actually Mississippi, University of Mississippi Medical Center, and then one at Alabama State in Montgomery, Alabama. And I applied late to Alabama State. And it's one of those things, I don't know people's faith or whatever, but I believe in God. So my faith was, it was one of those things. I was at a meeting and someone came up to me because I was in a competition and they did an introduction. And I was originally planning to apply to UAB, University of Alabama, Birmingham,
Yes.
and UMC, University of Mississippi Medical Center. And after this competition and going over my future aspirations, there was a man who walked up to me and said, "Hey, did you know that Alabama State had a PT program?" And I said, "I did not know that." He said, "Yeah, I think you should apply there. There's the HBCU. It's a fairly new program. So we had this dynamic lady who's helping to get us started named Linda Woodruff, just applied to the program." So I said, okay. I applied and I applied late. And I got a call one day from this woman and she said, "Baby, do you know that our deadline was yesterday and I should take this application, but it looks pretty good. So I'm gonna throw it in there and see what happens." And then the staff associate called and kind of gave me the same business, as they say. And so because I was late applying, they called me and said, "You got in, but we have orientation in a week." and you got to be here on this day at this time. I was like, wow. I got in, and I had a decision to make of my two athletic training VA positions. I got interviews there too, and I thought I was a pretty strong shot to get one of those. So now I have to decide, go be a graduate athletic trainer. And these were SEC schools, so Southeastern Conference football, so major football. And I'm just like, wow. And I got into PT school. The deciding factor was not only did I get into PT school, but Alabama State offered me a scholarship because they were new programs that had been developed out of a desegregation case. So it was just couldn't say no. I got into PT school on my first try, and I got a scholarship. So I went there, I went to Alabama State, and as a student, I always wanted to be involved. When we looked at the history of Alabama State, how it was founded by 9 formerly enslaved individuals. Again, knowing that the PT school had come as a result of a desegregation case, we did a lot of things in the community. So we started to have that mission-minded focus is what I called it. And we got to work in a lot of rural areas. I did a lot of work in rural healthcare, and I went through, graduated, and then I started working. So I wasn't far from sports. Even though I worked in rural healthcare and things like that, I ended up going to Birmingham and working with a clinic that was affiliated with the Andrews Institute, Andrews Orthopedics. And then I moved to Tuscaloosa, where we had a satellite clinic there. And we were the PT provider for the University of Alabama. We were the PT provider for a small Division II HBCU, still in college, local community college and high school. So I got my sport. And then I got to open a satellite clinic further away where I went to undergraduate at the University of West Alabama in rural West Alabama in the Alabama Black Belt. So I got my sports fix, but I also had this thing where I was seeing healthcare disparities from a socioeconomic status, from a racial ethnic status. It was just so much disparity wrapped up into one. And it led me to the work that I'm doing now. It planted the seed. And so from there, I worked for a bit. After 4 years out of school, I got a call one day from Stephen Chesbro, who was the dean at Alabama State University. Well, I got an email that I did not respond to because I thought this cannot be for me. This has to be somebody else. And the email said, hey, if you're going to be at CSM was in New Orleans. This was 2011, I believe. You're going to be at CSM. I'd love to talk to you about potentially coming on board at Alabama State. That's why I said it cannot be meant for me. It has to be somebody else. And I didn't respond. And I'm in one of the exhibit halls at CSM. And I happened to walk past Stephen. And he said, you never responded to my email. And he said, let's go to lunch here. So we went to lunch. And he had one of my favorite professors there who I guess he knew I couldn't say no to. And we talked, and I went through the interview process, and that was my first teaching job. So
4 years out?
4 years out,
Wow.
I started teaching at Alabama State University, which is where I went to school. And it was a hybrid position. I taught part-time in the PT department, and the other 50% of my time was in university athletics. So I was the coordinator of athletic rehabilitation for university athletics. Because I thought I was too young to kind of give up practicing. So I still wanted to have an interest. And I taught in the ortho track, management, and then some business. Because by that point, even though I was 4 years out, I had been in management for 3 years of that 4 years, and now coming into this. So I had things to offer that I didn't even realize I had.
Right.
And that's what led me to education.
Wow. And it's like your story, like you said, having your initial background in athletic training. And I like your analogy when you said being a mechanic working on the most exotic cars. That I got to use that one day. But then being put in the right place at the right time by the grace of God, like you said, leaning on your faith, where you were able to come to Alabama. You still have a hand in athletics and orthopedics, but now it's opening up a door to education where you might not have thought that you would have been down that path. And then fast forward to where you are now at your present place, where you're at Washington University School of Medicine in St. Louis, and being the assistant director of DEI, and then being an assistant professor in the program. I know that since you do a lot with DEI, and what brings you here for our podcast today is looking at psychological safety. So tell us what that is And how does it have implications for physical therapy education with regards to diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, so psychological safety, I think Amy Edmondson gets the credit for bringing this out today, but it's actually been around, I think, since the 60s, if I remember correctly. But Edmondson has really focused this work as we talk about teams and performance of teams. And so her definition is that basically it's the belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes, and that the team is safe for interpersonal risk taking. And so when I think about that definition and I relate it to DEIB, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, Edmondson says that psychological safety is the underpinning for team performance. But I think of it when I think about, again, DEIB, is that it really is the underpinning of that, especially when you talk about inclusion and belonging, along with equity, I think are the hallmark, are the most important aspects of DEIB. I didn't say diversity because you can have numbers, but the numbers don't matter if you don't have the other three. Belonging is our ultimate goal. Inclusion and equity are the tools that kind of get us there. But I think psychological safety is the thread within that. We talk about threading things a lot through the curriculum in education. But psychological safety is not only the thread for ensuring that we are being inclusive and we are equitable in our practices to get to that belonging, but I think it also helps us with how we perform in any organization. So it's not only a key thread in DEIB, and I think it's very important when we think about it for DEIB, but also just a high functioning team. If your team is high functioning, if your team is happy, I think that you have a high level of psychological safety,
And
even
I
if you've
know,
never heard that before.
right, yeah, and I love the fact of bringing this concept to light. And I know that some people might look at this not exactly knowing before what you said about what psychological safety is. Some people might look at the word safety by itself and say, okay, when we look at safety with DEIB, and then we add the word psychological in front of it, who is this psychological safety for? Is it for these people who are members of historically marginalized and excluded groups, or is it for everyone that is part of, like you said, this team?
I think if you want to break it down strictly from a DEIB, even if you're doing it from a strictly DEIB standpoint, because if we only look at DEIB as being beneficial to those who are historically excluded, I think we've already missed the boat. It's a benefit to everyone in your organization. So psychological safety is that for everyone in your organization. It speaks to being able to have a curiosity, but a respectful curiosity. I tell my students and my colleagues, I guess, because my role is more administrative than it is just faculty now, that when I can only guarantee you physical safety to the extent that I am in your presence and I can protect you. So I don't like to use things like safe spaces. I can offer you a supportive space, but the physical safety that I can give you only extends to the capacity that my body can go. But we can offer a supportive space, but I can try to create a psychological safe space. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Is a space where you have the freedom to express your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your beliefs, all these things that you want to be. And how much better would we operate if we just take this from an education perspective? If we asked our learners those questions. What scares you about being in this place? What do you hope for being in this place? How could I best respond to you? Psychological safety, and there's a neuropsychologist, scientist, leadership person, David Rock,
Yes.
who has come up with the SCARF model. And SCARF is, I believe, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. That's what SCARF stands for. And some people have different aspects of SCARF so relatedness or fairness is your thing, then I need to be aware of that. And I know how best to relate to you. There's some people who just want to be left alone, right? But you want autonomy. So if I'm micromanaging you, I'm not allowing you to have or develop that psychological safety.
Mhm.
If relatedness is very important to you, you want to feel like you're a part of the group, but you're always excluded. So then we can tie those things into DEIB from our historically excluded population
Right.
and individuals, because there is no relatedness if you've been historically excluded, if you don't see yourself present. So how do we then go out of our way to make you feel, and you have to do that. You have to go out of your way, because leaders who recognize the importance of psychological safety are going to use words like we, but you have to mean them. You just can't say we, but I never invite Don to the party. I only bring you in when you absolutely have to be there, but I don't check on you. And so you think about that from, I always talk about the Shandaran aspect of FLD, first only different. If you're the first person within this group who comes from a historically excluded background, if you're the only person, or if you're otherwise,
Different.
if everybody on your faculty is heterosexual except for one person. So I ask everybody else, how was your weekend with your wife or your husband? But I don't do that to the person who has the same sex partner. That's not a psychologically safe environment. And I just say, oh yeah, I treat them well, but you keep them limited in some. You don't fully bring them in to be engaged. And that's just one aspect of it. So it ties into our inclusion practice. Are we truly being inclusive? If I don't ask you about your weekend like I would everybody else, then what other opportunities may I limit from you? And so again, are we allowing environments to be psychologically safe? Because what neuroscience says is we either retreat from a threat or we run towards a reward. And this SCARF model basically says what's important to you: status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, or fairness. And if it's threatened, you're going to retreat from it.
Exactly.
And if you're rewarded for it, you're going to run towards it. So you're going to be more engaged into that organization. You're going to be able to offer more to that team. You can say you're not berated for fear of making mistakes. Then if that's rewarded, okay, you made a mistake, but you tried. How about doing this? And it's how we react to those things that make somebody say, oh, I made this mistake and nobody was going to fire me. But then when we look at bringing individuals in who have been historically excluded, we come in with this anxiety. I have to say, when I took my role here at Watch You, one of the things initially that I said, oh, I was so surprised that I was hired. And people said, why? And I said, as I looked at the website, going through the hiring process, I didn't see anybody who looked like me. Not only that, I didn't see many people who didn't have some connection to Watch You prior to being there. They all had some, or the majority had some connection. So there were not a lot of outside people. So there was a level of anxiety. There was some psychological unsafety that I was thinking that I would have to overcome. So people being intentional about reaching out to me, including me, asking me things, telling me it's okay or showing me, not just telling me, because we say a lot of things, but do we have actions behind what we say? And are we intentional with what we do? And once we see that, then for me, the anxiety comes down, and it came down, and I opened up and I felt free to then say, hey, these are things that I see that we're doing well. These are things that I see that we're not doing so well. These are definitely things that we should not be doing. This is wrong. And when there was discussion around it, and then some respectful curiosity around things not understood. And I want to emphasize respectful curiosity.
I like that. I like that phrase.
It's not a curiosity
Yes.
because, oh, you're a Black male in this space. Tell me what's that? I don't know. But if it's Julian, I really want to get your perspective, because you are the first to be here in this role, not as a student, but not just as a faculty member. You have this leadership position. You're an administrator here. What has that experience been like for you, and how does it relate? How can we be better and be? That's a respectful curiosity,
Right?
Versus just wanting me to speak for, and I can't speak. I am Julian, who happens to be a Black male and a proud Black male, but I can't speak for all Black men.
All Black men, exactly.
And so it's about how we approach things and understand what respectful curiosity is. Lisa Van Hoos is very prominent for saying, if all else fails, if you can't bring respectful curiosity, you should probably Google, you know, that, and I'll leave it at that. We can fill it.
Exactly.
We can fill in the blank.
I hear you
So
100%. Yes.
and that's what it means, I think, to operate in psychological safety. And if we're doing that, I think we really are being cognizant of those diversity, equity, inclusion, getting to belonging.
And now for a quick shout out to our newest sponsor, Varela Financial. If you're a physical therapist and you have student loan debt, you got to talk to these guys. What makes them unique is that they view financial planning like running hurdles on a track. And for PTs, the first hurdle many of us run into is student loan debt. Varela Financial will help you get over that hurdle. They not only take the time to explain to you which plans you individually qualify for and how those plans work, but they also take the time to show you what your individual case looks like, mapped out within each option. So if you're looking for help on your student loan debt or any area of personal finances, we recommend working with them. I use Varela Financial personally, and they were able to help me lower my student loan repayment from about $1,800 a month down to about $135 per month simply by finding the right repayment plan that best fit me, my family, and our life goals. You can check them out at varelafinancial.com. Link is in the show notes if you need it for reference, and tell them the HET podcast crew sent you. And now back to the show.
And I think what you said, especially, I like the part that you emphasized intentional, and I throw the word prioritize as well, because if we think about higher education, we think about doctor of physical therapy programs or even PTA programs, that foundation has to be laid at the beginning when you have faculty members that are existing, but especially when new faculty members come on board, when you have students who already exist in your programs, but especially with the new students, you have to lay that culture of psychological safety at the very beginning and be intentional with it and prioritize it and recognize that we have these implicit biases that actually interact with our ability to, create this space for psychological safety. And we have to recognize that. It's a development process. It's not a one and done where you create this space and you expect people to say, okay, do you feel psychologically safe right now? Okay, we're good. We can move on and go about business as usual. It is a change in the culture of physical therapy programs to ensure that faculty and students, and I'll even throw in staff, can feel like they belong and that what they say and what they do matter and that they're being heard. And like you said, I like the fact that you said that respectful curiosity. If people don't know, then ask with the intent of really wanting to understand who I am and how who I am and my lived experiences and perspectives can help add value to your program. And I think that's a lot of the missing piece.
Yeah, I think this is, if I was starting a program today, knowing what I know now, this would have to be something that I would require anybody that I brought in to truly express some understanding around.
Yes.
Because you're right. The people, when we say bias, and I've done this with bias training, is there's a reflective activity where you say what your bias may be. And we all have them. It's how we're hardwired. And it's quick, easy. The brain is wired for efficiency. It doesn't want to think. It just wants to do.
Yes.
Because that's safety. We know that from your neuroscience, and that's the basics behind that. And it's more complex. So you have to work to train yourself out. Now, I'm not saying that if it's a fire going that you run into that building, but people do that. But they have to go against everything that their body is telling them. When we have biases, and we all have them, but we acknowledge them, we can do two things. We can operate in them, or we can be cognizant of them and work to not let them lead us astray. And that takes work. And once you're doing that work, if you can bring into this high performing team, because if I like the psychological safety approach, because if I'm doing this for everyone, then I have to be mindful of my bias for everybody that I come into contact with. I have to think, if Dr. Brown is my favorite person, then Dr. Magee, I have to treat the same way. Because if I don't, then I'm not creating an environment conducive for Dr. Magee to grow, only for Dr. Brown and the other people in my circle. But if I truly want to say that I run an organization that is high performing, then I have to be mindful of Dr. Magee just as much as I am for Dr. Brown. And I have to be concerned about Dr. Magee's growth just as much as I am about Dr. Brown. This is not, like you said, this is not an arrival and endpoint. Oh, we are psychologically safe today. You may not be tomorrow. The class of 23 may feel like, oh, this was a great environment, but the class of 24 may not.
Right.
Because people change, times change,
Exactly.
ideas change, and you have to be at the forefront. If we're going to be an efficient, innovative, and transformative profession, we have to think about these things. I think, again, that's why I've enjoyed learning the process of people management and leadership to push forward change leadership. And transformative institutions and organizations are constantly aware of it. And our profession has an opportunity to be transformative. And we can't let people put labels on what this is.
Right.
Nothing that I've said involves critical race theory, but I'm not ashamed to say that critical race theory is important to think about as we think about these things. I'm not saying it's important to think about identity, gender identity, because individuals have multiple identities. So
Right.
if we are not talking about intersectionality and we don't understand those things, if we don't understand the role that identity plays, whether you are a cisgender white Christian male, you still have an identity. And if I don't do things that support your psychological safety, now that doesn't mean that you get to do everything that you want to do. That's not what psychological safety means. I think people need to be aware and understand what it is and what it doesn't mean that you won't be challenged. It doesn't mean that you won't have some uncomfortable moments.
Exactly.
But what it means is that I will do my best to make sure that I am equitable and equal in my treatment, mainly equitable, that we are doing all that we can to be inclusive in our spaces, and that we are showing, again, action. We want every individual that we have here to feel, and not just feel, to know that they belong. And how do we do that? And that takes work. That is hard work.
It is. And like you said at the beginning, we have these buzzwords that's comfortable and uncomfortable. But if you are truly passionate and dedicated to create equitable spaces, to create psychologically safe spaces, to be inclusive and embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion, then you're going to put in the work, much like you put in the work to learn a course topic. This is work, and it's not a check mark. It's not a one and done. And, something you said before about identities. My research is on leadership, and identity conscious leadership is very important. Identity conscious recognition. Know who's in your room, who's in your classroom, who's on your faculty. Because if you don't know the individuals around you, how can you truly strive to create psychologically safe spaces? How can you truly strive to be equitable? And I think that this concept is something that, it's like you said, the concept has been around for a while. We put labels on things, but we need to take this concept and say, okay, psychological safety, it is here. It is intertwined with diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. Let's bring this up to the forefront and use this as the foundation, or one of the main foundations from which education has to rest. Otherwise, without it, we're missing the boat. And when we think about all students, all faculty, but especially those from historically marginalized and excluded groups, we're going to fail them.
I always challenge people to say, once you know this, because that's simple, and I agree with you, are you okay with failing a student? And not failing in they failed your class, but you not doing all that you could have done for them.
Right.
And would you do that for your patient? And if you say yes, that's who you are. But most people will not say yes, even if they think, I don't believe you. But just be honest with you, because that's what you're saying. You're saying, I'm okay not giving my best today to this person. And if you have 20 students in your classroom and you're going to see 20 patients for the day, if you have 20 colleagues that you come into contact with, again, it is hard. There are some days where you might not get the best Julian that you can. But I have to tell myself, you know what? I failed myself today. When I first started teaching at Alabama State, there was a class I was in, and I was not prepared for it. I don't know what was going on in my life that day that and I went through the class, and at the end, I did something. I stopped the class just before, and I said, you know what, everyone, I'm sorry, because today I did not give you
Not
half of my best, and you don't deserve that. And I failed you today, and I promise you, I won't ever do it again. And the look on the students' faces when I did that was one of shock, because never had they had someone who was their professor, and maybe because I was fairly close in age to a lot of them to say that, but I got so much more respect from them.
right.
They came to me, they found me more approachable. When they couldn't talk to other professors, they would come to me and help. And so then again, it was just these little things that started to put into motion for me. I wasn't trying to be their friend, but they deserved that kind of respect.
Right.
And even though I didn't do my best, I admitted my failure.
Right.
So they can then admit to me when they fail and not feel like they had, so that they were going to be punished because of it.
Right.
And they didn't punish me.
For you to be being courageous, being able to make yourself vulnerable, again, that's why they look at you in awe, because who does that? And that allows them to be able to open up and be able to be part of creating that psychological safe space. It's not just on us faculty members to do that, but it's also on the students to be able to do that as well. And so this concept is something that I hope that all physical therapists, I hope whether you're a faculty member, whether you're a clinician, whether you're a researcher, whether you're a student listening to this podcast, that you really think about this concept, you look it up, and stay tuned for more that Dr. Julian Magee will enlighten us with. But before we go, because we have a couple minutes left,
Okay.
I want to ask you one thing, and it may or may not be related to this topic of psychological safety, but in a minute or two, if you could change one aspect of healthcare education, what would you change? Why would you change it? And how would you change it?
Hard question. A lot of things to do. But right now, I think the most pressing issue, other than seeing those from historically excluded backgrounds get in, is to change the cost. I don't want to knock my friends in medicine, so MD, and they have cost, but they have more opportunity to earn more. They have opportunities to have their loans forgiven, and not from some legislation that's being fought against right now. But we, who are just as important to the healthcare team,
Right.
and PT, OT, speech, rehab, we are finding ourselves spending more, and we're not getting the respect that we deserve. So we have to find a way to combat that. And I don't know what that looks like. I'm trying to figure that out. That luckily I work with someone who is dedicated to bringing down the cost of education, and that's part of his scholarship, his scholarly agenda. But I think decreasing the cost to increase access to individuals.
Right.
That's just what we have to do. And twofold, the other part of that is then we have to see organizations willing to pay for the value in what we do. I think that corporations, and this is no knock on them, again, being from the South in church, if you can't say amen, say ouch, is that while they will ask that the educational institutions decrease tuition, they have not done anything to increase costs in the same manner as we see inflation. So pay more, decrease the cost.
Exactly.
So we can have a livelihood and not induce burnout and compassion fatigue.
Exactly. And I think that's a great point, because access through financial resources is very important to all of us. We want to thank you, Dr. Magee, for being our very special guest on the Healthcare Education Transformation Podcast. And we look forward to more interviews with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Well, I hope that episode was entertaining as much as it was informational and educational. If you enjoyed this episode or any of our past episodes, we ask you to please subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating and review. And please share out the episodes to those who you feel may be able to benefit from them. We also urge you to follow us on all social media platforms at HET Podcast, and let us know what topics or experts you would like to hear from in future episodes. And just as a reminder, none of the information on today's show should be considered medical advice. It's simply infotainment or edutainment to help educate our audience. For medical advice, we always advise you to reach out to your preferred medical professionals, and we'll see you on the next show.